Okay, those women who marched in the streets of New York City calling for better wages and lower working days, shorter working days, those women had a lot of courage, and we celebrate them. But that was 100 years ago. And women still do 2/3 of the world's work.
Yep.
And they only get 5% of the pay because so much of women's work isn't paid at all. So what do we celebrate? This nation has no regard for its women.
That's right.
Congress doesn't care a bit that 13 million women of childbearing age don't have any medical insurance. That means that if they get pregnant, they can't get any prenatal care. And this nation still has women dying of pregnancy-related problems. And black women are dying at a rate 5 times as many as white women. But they still want to control women's bodies and eliminate our right to abortion. 15 states have all but eliminated it. And they're hypocrites because they don't care about the children either. They don't care if they're fed or educated. So what is there to celebrate? Well, like the Socialist Congress, we celebrate those women's resistance.
Yes.
And as Debbie said, we have a lot of women right here in Detroit's Workers' World Party that should be celebrated. And certainly we don't want to forget the articles, Chris's articles, and Andrea's speeches, and Sandra's passion. But one of the first meetings that I ever went to, when the office was over there on Grand River, there was a black woman speaking. And while she was speaking, we heard a baby or a child cry out. They used to have the nursery upstairs, and the child cried, and we could hear from the nursery. And the speaker locked eyes with somebody in the audience, and she said, "That's so-and-so," as though to say, "You must go take care of that baby." You'd think that she would stumble a little and have to look back in her notes and everything, but no, she went right on with her speech. And you know, I didn't know her, but I said to myself, that woman knows what she's talking about. That was Debbie Johnson, Communist Debbie Johnson. And she still knows what she's talking about. She was raised in Cincinnati, as she mentioned, and she mentioned the murders that took place every weekend. They were mostly young black men. And her family subscribed to the Jet magazine, a black magazine, and they told about those murders. And every one made her very angry. And she told you about the segregated parks. Well, her father worked for GE, and GE wanted to give a picnic for their workers. And the only way that they could do it in a park was to rent the park for a day. And that way they could bring in their black workers the same as their white workers. And so Debbie realized that the parks, that she would not be welcome in Cincinnati's parks. And she became angry about that. At a time when her father had had a heart attack and he was in the hospital recuperating, IRS came knocking at the door, and they said he owed $760, which he didn't think he owed, but they said if he didn't pay up right now, they were going to take his house. In fact, they were going to go out and padlock the door, and his wife and children wouldn't be able to get in. Well, his fellow workers took up a collection to pay the $760, or so that the family would still have a house. About that time, Debbie's mother died, and she went to live in Saginaw, and then she came to live in Ann Arbor to go to the University of Michigan. The first group she became acquainted with at the university was a group working on South Africa. They were opposed to the apartheid in South Africa. Well, she'd never heard of South Africa, and she'd never heard about apartheid, and she was amazed. And so she took an African history class, and she was thrilled with it. She took a philosophy class, and she was assigned to read the writings of Karl Marx. And it was so exciting to her, and she stayed up all night long reading it over and over. And the next morning, she went to her teaching person, and she said that she was in love with Karl Marx. And she learned about a group that was working on El Salvador, and she learned about the problems in El Salvador, and she learned about Nicaragua and the blockade of the ports and the Contras, and she learned about the embargo against Cuba, and she learned about the war on Vietnam, and she felt like she had just woke up. And she remembered the murders that came every weekend, and the segregated parks that she couldn't go to. And she realized that the same government that had instituted this racism and promoted it had been the same government that harassed her father when he was in the hospital. And it was the same government that was causing the problems and the pain of these people in all those countries. And her anger turned to loathing. She heard speeches by Malcolm X, and she says the speeches sounded like music to her ears. And she heard about the Black Panthers, and she loved them. And through a fellow worker at Legal Aid, she met a guy named Mike, and they heard about Workers' World Party in Detroit. And they got married, and they went to Detroit to one of the meetings of Workers' World Party. The first thing she saw as she walked into the office was a banner stretched across the front of the office, and it had a picture of Che Guevara on it. And over on the wall was a poster about South Africa and opposing the apartheid. And the group was working on planning a protest about the country of El Salvador and against the government that was causing the problems there. And she found out that they were Marxist, and she heard that their platform was for self-determination and national liberation, and she was overjoyed.